He fired the entire advisory committee on immunization practices, right at the very height of public debate over vaccine safety. Let that sink in for a moment. One day, they were methodically reviewing data from across the globe, and the next, they were shown the door, their positions replaced overnight by a new hand-picked panel. And the man stirring it all up? None other than Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., the United States Secretary of Health. How did a country, once seen as a driving force in vaccine research and development, end up with this sudden shift at the top? And more importantly, how does it threaten the entire global approach to vaccines? Today we are diving deep into this controversy to understand exactly what happened, why it matters, and how it could shape the future of public health. In this episode, we will uncover the biggest claims Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has made about vaccine safety, reveal the global cascade of consequences that may follow his decision to pull funding from crucial vaccination programs, and explore some of the myths surrounding long-standing vaccines like diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. If you think it is all a bit much, hold tight, because each twist adds another layer to an already tangled web of policy changes, personal convictions, and unresolved fears. The United States has been heralded for its leadership in vaccines for generations. From the inactivated polio vaccine trials decades ago to the robust partnerships with international bodies that fund shots for vulnerable communities, the American imprimatur has always carried weight. Now, at the stroke of a pen, a newly minted Secretary of Health is casting doubt on a wide array of vaccines that countless studies worldwide confirm to be safe and essential. This abrupt break from the past is ruffling the feathers of scientists, doctors, and inhabitants of every corner of the world, who all have reason to worry that one man's personal convictions might influence the health of entire continents. So, how did we get here? 2 weeks ago, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. declared that conflicts of interest ran so deep within the existing Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices that its members could not possibly be trusted any longer. Without warning, he removed them, sweeping away decades of combined expertise and leaving a gap that is now filled by those he personally believes can bring a fresh perspective. Supporters of these moves cheer him on as a maverick ready to combat corruption, while critics contend he is ignoring established science at a perilous junction. The question is, which side has a better handle on the facts? Before we get to that, let us consider the first big bombshell that Secretary Kennedy dropped right after firing the old committee. He confirmed that the United States would immediately stop channeling funds to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which has quietly revolutionized immunization efforts across the developing world for years. To put this in perspective, the United States used to cover about 13% of Gavi's donor funds, and that money went toward protecting millions of children from diseases like measles, hepatitis B, and more. Why would halting that support matter? Well, Gavi itself has predicted that losing substantial backing from the United States could result in up to 1 million deaths due to missed vaccinations. That is a chilling figure, and it drives home the immense stakes of abrupt policymaking. But from Kennedy's point of view, Gavi is guilty of what he calls willful ignorance of inconvenient science. Specifically, he blasted them for recommending vaccination to pregnant women during the COVID-19 pandemic, stating that no conclusive data existed to prove it would protect both mother and child without causing additional risks. In reality, though, robust global studies have shown that a COVID-19 infection during pregnancy can raise the chances of miscarriage by up to twofold, or even fourfold, intensifying the inherent fragility of that crucial stage of life. Critics of Kennedy argue that discounting those studies and funding cuts, which have now indeed taken effect, do not merely impact the short-term budget. They also diminish trust in public health, especially in places that can least afford to lose that trust. To add more confusion, he also singled out the combined diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine, raising alarm that it could be more harmful than beneficial. That message, delivered bluntly, may sound persuasive for someone determined to find fault, but the story itself is more nuanced. It goes like this. In the early 2000s, 3 community-based observational studies in Africa suggested a possible link between higher mortality in infants and use of the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine. That inevitably sent shockwaves across public health circles, because decades of earlier trials had found no such link. Additional smaller studies also flagged potential gender-related differences, supposedly highlighting that female children might be especially at risk. Soon enough, the World Health Organization stepped in and performed a full review, concluding in 2014 that the allegations could not be successfully replicated or interpreted as proof of a dangerous link. Vigilance remains essential, of course, but every large-scale, peer-reviewed study since has pointed to the vaccine's safety. Nevertheless, Secretary Kennedy repeated these older claims in an announcement withdrawing United States support for Gavi, insisting the alliance had not kept up with the best science. Many worry that this narrative, told by someone so prominent, will reinforce existing fears and hamper vaccination programs in regions still struggling with old threats. That is precisely what the original Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices was designed to combat, damaging misinformation that can spread like wildfire. They were experts who calmly pored over data on possible side effects, transmission rates, and the overall benefit of each vaccine before rendering carefully balanced opinions. With them gone, replaced by new figures whose backgrounds and motivations remain unclear, the system for analyzing global health decisions appears more vulnerable than ever. Meanwhile, one of Kennedy's biggest points of contention is thiomersal, better known in the United States as thimerosal, a preservative containing a form of mercury. Several decades ago, speculation emerged that mercury in vaccines might lead to autism, neurological disorders, or other health risks. Over many years, scientists have repeatedly and carefully cross-checked those claims, only to find no credible evidence that thiomersal is a threat in any of the recommended doses. Nonetheless, the stigma persists, in part because mercury has such a dreadful reputation in other contexts. Citizens hear that word and assume the worst, even though the alleged negative outcomes have not been confirmed by reputable institutions. Small wonder that vaccine deniers have latched onto thiomersal as a symbol of potential wrongdoing lurking within the system. But how does thiomersal really fit into modern vaccines? Outside of the United States, some countries use multi-dose vials of vaccines containing thiomersal as a cost-effective measure. It prevents bacterial and fungal contamination that could ruin entire supplies, especially in regions with limited refrigeration or uncertain transport infrastructure. For the record, in the United States, about 4% of adult influenza vaccines still contain thiomersal. Most are produced in single-dose vials without it. So, devoting an entire hearing to the so-called horrors of thiomersal, critics say, is a skillful distraction from more pressing considerations, such as ensuring compliance with established safety schedules or advocating for improved vaccine access in remote areas. After hearing about these developments, especially the global ramifications of these policy changes, I would like to take a brief moment to invite you to show your support if you find this discussion valuable. A simple gesture of appreciation helps keep conversations like this going, so do consider giving a like or a share if you believe these issues deserve more public attention. Now, let us return to the heart of the matter. Think about the timing. The Secretary fired the entire advisory committee, pointing to alleged conflicts of interest, yet did not provide substantial evidence that these conflicts swayed decision-making in any unethical direction. Critics lament that the move came right as the United States continued to grapple with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and the looming threat of other possible outbreaks. Vaccine skepticism, fueled by an abundance of viral rumors, is at an all-time high. The very last thing many doctors wanted was an authoritative figure stepping in and fanning those flames even further. As a direct result, we now have a top official proclaiming that vaccines containing thiomersal are dangerous, that pregnant women might face more risk from COVID-19 shots than from the virus itself, and that it is time to block funding for one of the biggest global immunization networks. Predictably, the consequences have come in waves. Gavi has to figure out how to plug the gap caused by the absence of United States support. Other donor countries have begun to question their own commitments, since the entire conversation around vaccine safety and accountability has been thrown into chaos. Observers wonder aloud whether these changes might create a vacuum where anti-vaccine voices can flourish. After all, if a major champion backtracks on long-standing global health initiatives, might that not embolden skeptics around the globe? Plunge deeper, and you find yet more controversies, such as the discussion over maternal health. Global medical communities were explicit in urging pregnant women to receive COVID-19 vaccines during the darkest days of the outbreak. The rationale was straightforward: a COVID-19 infection might lead to severe illness for expectant mothers, with an elevated possibility of miscarriage, especially if complications pile up. Meanwhile, immunity conferred by the vaccine carries real benefits for both the woman and the developing child. Placental transfer of maternal antibodies offers a protective head start in the infant's earliest months. Over time, that has proven to be a potent safeguard, especially in places where access to quality hospital care might be spotty. Kennedy's stance, however, has been unwavering. He thinks Gavi oversold the benefits and neglected to highlight potential side effects. More moderate voices respond that all medical interventions come with risks, but decades of internationally backed studies have shown that these vaccines are far safer than going unprotected. The data might shift over time as new variants arise, or the population's immunity profile changes. One thing remains clear, though. Refusing to fund a major vaccine alliance because you disagree with its attempts to protect pregnant women sets a precedent that some call impulsive and irresponsible. Now, let us spotlight a particular piece of the puzzle that seldom receives the press it deserves: the safety review processes themselves. Typically, an established advisory committee analyzes thousands of data points, from rates of adverse events to changes in disease burden, before giving a recommendation. Their job demands caution, a critical eye, and the humility to consider all angles. When questionable findings surface, such as those observational studies from the early 2000s suggesting increased infant mortality after diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis immunizations, committees do not simply brush them away. Instead, they look for confounding factors like malnutrition, healthcare access, or other infections that may be prevalent in the study areas. Then they weigh that evidence against the documented life-saving benefits of these shots. None of that nuance is easily distilled into a headline. By dismissing these committees and questioning the very premise of their expertise, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might well inject more confusion than clarity. The worry is that this new state of affairs will allow unsubstantiated claims to morph into widely accepted beliefs because the existing frameworks for reviewing data and providing guidance have been compromised. It is like removing the braking system from a vehicle speeding downhill. You may not crash immediately, but sooner or later, the risk becomes overwhelming. Here is another dimension. Turning away from Gavi does not just impact the fight against COVID-19, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Gavi also helps supply vaccines for other devastations, like yellow fever, meningitis, and rotavirus, viruses that often devastate communities with limited public health infrastructure. With less money to buy vaccines in bulk, distribution channels could slow, and in some hard-hit areas, they might dry up completely. Suddenly, a wave of previously contained outbreaks could resurface, leaving entire populations vulnerable to preventable tragedies. Yet, if you zoom in on the short-term political advantages, it can appear beneficial for someone like Kennedy to adopt a maverick anti-establishment aura. Large swaths of the public remain bitter over prolonged lockdowns, confusing guidelines, and shifting public health messages throughout the pandemic. So, any official who claims to champion the suppressed truth about vaccines can harness that discontent for press coverage. The question remains, at what cost? To put these policies into a broader light, let us look at how Australia, for instance, grapples with similar controversies. In Australia, thiomersal is virtually absent from routine childhood vaccines, except for the Q fever vaccine, which many members of the general public do not need. Meanwhile, the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation maintains a robust, evidence-based approach, and the government has reaffirmed its commitment through strategies like the National Immunisation Strategy. Their approach hews to the principle that good science, combined with thorough ethical peer review, ensures that Australians are not left behind in the fight against preventable diseases. At the same time, Australia continues supporting global efforts, having pledged hundreds of millions of dollars to back Gavi's initiatives in the coming years. That sets up a stark contrast. While one major country appears to be undermining the global immunization framework, another is steadfast in reinforcing it. Which path will other nations follow? That question haunts global health advocates because the rest of the world is watching the fallout of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s decisions. If one or two major donors were to echo his sentiments, Gavi or any other large-scale immunization effort might find itself teetering on the brink of disaster. When polio, measles, or cholera resurges in certain areas, the echoes of this policy shift might reverberate for generations. Of course, the debate hinges on trust. A chunk of the population that listens to Kennedy warns that the scientific establishment has often overstated the safety of some pharmaceuticals. No one can deny that cautionary tales exist throughout history. However, mainstream science usually works by correction. It evolves, updates guidelines, and recommends new best practices when fresh data comes in. The speed at which the COVID-19 vaccines were developed can make them seem untested to some, but the reality is that existing knowledge of coronaviruses combined with unprecedented levels of international collaboration to expedite that process without skipping essential steps. The global scientific apparatus remains open to reevaluation and further studies, precisely to correct any oversights. Kennedy's detractors argue that he has conflated legitimate scientific revision with the idea that all mainstream recommendations are guided by commercial rather than humanitarian concerns. When he sacked the old advisory committee on immunization practices, he ignited a debate that is not just about a single group's trustworthiness, but about how we form conclusions in public health. After all, committees are composed of experts with distinct areas of specialization, such as virology, epidemiology, immunology, and pediatrics. They might have occasional ties to the pharmaceutical industry, but ideally those ties are disclosed, regulated, and balanced by the presence of independent academics. This style of checks and balances ensures that when a vaccine scheduling question arises, all sides consider the data collectively, while conflict of interest measures ensure undue bias does not run amok. Does that mean every call is correct? Not necessarily. But it does minimize the risk of decisions being based on an individual's hunch or agenda. By installing his own advisor so abruptly without a transparent selection process, Kennedy could undermine a system that has by and large served as a model for dozens of countries. That is a big gamble, especially considering that countless parents, soon-to-be mothers, and vulnerable populations rely on such advisories. On top of that, the momentum behind misinformation is now supercharged. Lynn Redwood, the person credited with drawing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into vaccine skepticism, took the floor during the new committee's first meeting, highlighting once again the already debunked accusations against thiomersal. In doing so, Redwood effectively signaled that these old arguments were taking center stage, overshadowing pressing tasks like developing new strategies to address under-vaccinated regions, focusing on novel immunization technologies, or providing more transparent cost-benefit analyses for pregnant women. It is no wonder the public feels whipsawed by shifting priorities. One day the conversation was about better distribution of existing vaccines, and the next it became a rehash of the Mercury debate from the 1990s. If you feel the magnitude of these revelations, then you might appreciate what we aim to do here: shed light on hidden consequences and clarify fact from speculation. If you have not done so yet, consider subscribing. I would love to have you along for future investigations that take us beyond the headlines and into the critical ethical, scientific, and policy considerations that shape our world. Ultimately, the big question is how long this skepticism wave will last in the United States and beyond. Health professionals fret that once trust is eroded, it takes monumental effort to restore it. Vaccination coverage rates can plummet with alarming speed, as parents decide to delay or skip recommended shots. Every year that coverage declines, diseases that were once thought of as mere textbook examples can reemerge with deadly force. When you also factor in the possibility that mutated strains can become even more difficult to manage, you realize that a chain reaction is poised to unfold. At the global level, the story is equally concerning. Defunding Gavi puts a robust system of vaccine purchase and distribution in jeopardy. The alliance's track record of delivering essential vaccines, from polio to tetanus, is well documented. Tens of millions of children have been saved from deaths or chronic complications thanks to the steady flow of immunizations that Gavi helps coordinate. If that funding is pulled at a pivotal moment, fewer children get immunized, more pockets of infection persist, and a brand new wave of public health challenges emerges. Some experts compare these policy changes to rearranging the guardrails on a high bridge. People might keep driving normally for a while, but the safety net that used to prevent disastrous mistakes is not there anymore. If enough travelers bunt against the edge or something unexpected happens, the consequences grow dire. In vaccine terms, a slow-building problem might not look urgent until an outbreak hits and the system is too frail to contain it. And Americans are feeling the confusion too. Although the Secretary's new advisors may well be bright, they have not been time-tested, and the dramatic nature of the turnover means that certain institutional memories have been lost. Policies developed over decades might get discarded without thorough review or replaced by personal convictions that have not undergone meticulous peer analysis. Some advisors keep referencing hidden knowledge or turning away from flawed science, but so far, they have not provided convincing published data. It is almost a leap of faith, ironically steeped in a worldview that everything about vaccines needs to be reinvestigated from the ground up. Should the rest of the world look on in alarm? The short answer is, many do. Yet countries like Australia show that stable processes and broad acceptance of established vaccine guidelines can serve as a buffer, insulating at least some societies from the shockwaves. The real worry is that individuals from other nations, especially those in communities already rife with skepticism, might use American doubts as proof that they too should opt out of recommended vaccines. To wrap up, the storyline we have delved into is both complicated and urgent. A Secretary of Health who once posited himself as a champion for reform has risen to high office and promptly turned a skeptical eye on mainstream vaccine recommendations, even as global health institutions attempt to maintain or expand coverage. By drawing on older controversies like thiamirsal's role in vaccine formulations or the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccines' alleged links to infant mortality, he has effectively stirred the pot at a time when confidence in vaccines was just starting to regain stability. Meanwhile, by yanking financial support from Gavi, he may weaken a lifeline that keeps millions of children immunized against preventable diseases. Where do we go from here? Vigilance matters more than ever. That means reading beyond headlines, consulting experts who have devoted their careers to understanding immunology and epidemiology, and remembering that cautionary stories about vaccines often collapse under rigorous scrutiny. The bigger tragedy is that entire communities might become susceptible to the illusions of safety that come with ignoring vaccines, until a resurgent disease claims lives unnecessarily. This is not simply a national drama for the United States, nor is it a political chess match confined to stateside watchers. Medical workers across Africa, Asia, and Latin America may soon find themselves unable to immunize children against the simplest diseases if resources dry up, or if local leaders echo Kennedy's calls. The synergy built up over the last few decades around global immunization strategies could unravel in unexpected ways, reversing some of the progress that has made significant leaps in reducing childhood deaths. As new updates emerge from the Secretary's replacement committee, we can only hope that cooler heads prevail and that any concerns about vaccine safety are answered through credible investigations rather than through rhetorical battles. For the families that have been relying on Gavi's vaccine programs, for pregnant women wanting to protect themselves and their babies, and for anyone worried about surging diseases once believed to be reined in, these next months and years might test the resilience of our global health infrastructure like never before. However this plays out, it is a clarion call for everyone to get informed, stay engaged, and remain appropriately skeptical when unverified claims about vaccines start circulating. The entire medical community, from top-tier researchers to the nurse administering routine shots, relies on public confidence for success in beating back widespread health threats. Losing that confidence is easy. Rebuilding it is not. And that is where we leave you for now, with the stakes laid bare and the questions still swirling. Keep an eye on developments from Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s office. Watch how Gavi recalibrates after losing a chunk of its funding, and remember just how vital independent, expert-driven oversight is for massive, life-saving vaccine programs. The world will be watching as well. Let us hope the churn of misinformation does not drown out reputable science. Lives truly hang in the balance.